Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to track 4 here at Radio Days, and I hope you are all doing all right. And if you were at the party at the Blitz Club last night, I hope you had a great time. I'm Des Paul. I'm looking after the room today. So just to give you a little bit of background to me, I run a production company called The Content Works based in London, and we produce video, audio and podcasts. My background is in radio and television and podcasting nowadays as well. And we have a very interesting session for the next 40 minutes. So obviously, podcasts are very much a growing format, and one of the things that we need to do is we need to understand how to commercialize them and how to get brands involved with podcasts and make a success of it. So that's what we're going to be talking about for the next session. But before that, I need to do a few sponsorship messages to say thank you very much to our silver sponsors, Pure Jingles, Radio Analyzer, Radio Intelligence, Stream Monkey, Triton Digital, XPLR Media as well. They're all out in the foyer, so obviously in the breaks, please do go around and have a look and see how many people are using Rodecaster Pro mixers to deliver audio. That's quite a game-changing product. But anyway, we'll talk more about that a bit later on. So I'll hand you over to the expert to talk about with our pan-European panel about how we get branded content into podcasts. So please welcome, to look after this session, Mads Moller from Beam Audio.
Good evening, Europe. I reckon this was the closest I'll ever be to hosting the Eurovision, so I had to say it. Today we're going to talk about how we succeed in making branded content, maybe also a bit about how we don't succeed in making branded content. But along with me, I have Nawal Hadrami from CALLIOPÉ in France. Give her a big round of applause.
Thank you. Hello.
And we also have Sola from Territory, Germany. Yeah. The thing with branded podcasts, branded content, is that it's a place where the money is if you get smart enough to figure out where they are and how to reach them. We all have 3 different ways of working with branded content with customers. It's very different from Denmark to France, from France to Germany, and so on. So we'll try to give a bit of a portrait of how we do it, at least, and hopefully you can use some of what we are saying. It's going to be focused on turning new customers into recurring customers. Once you have a good customer, try to sell that season 2, make the product good enough for them to want to buy a season 2. And in the end, we're going to try to tell a bit about how we acquire customers, which is also very different from Denmark to Germany and France. So, could you just do a short presentation of Territory, Anna? What is Territory all about?
Sure. So we have our origin actually in corporate publishing. So if there are any older Germans here, we used to belong to Gruner und Jahr, the big publishing house in Hamburg. But now we're a separate unit under the umbrella of the Bertelsmann Marketing Services. So we had our start in corporate publishing. That's how we got Lufthansa and Deutsche Bahn on board as clients. But now we're a full-service agency with 8 locations and around 800 employees all across Germany and a few other European locations as well. So we try to offer anything you need to content marketing, video, audio, obviously, and online services.
And your role there?
I'm a producer for video and audio, but since the pandemic, I've merged to the podcast unit full-time.
And CALLIOPÉ, what is that all about?
It's about branded podcasts. So I created CALLIOPÉ in 2019. My background is a communication and marketing agency background. So we created CALLIOPÉ with my associate to allow brands to have like slow content and to offer to their audience a slow content. So we started with 100% branded podcasts. So it is 100% of our turnover. And so we started with luxury brand at the beginning. And after we started to work with internal communication services too. And we have now 2 offers. We offer the creation of the podcast, of course. So it means all the strategy, the the creation of the format, the editorial line, the production, of course, and after we have another division to work more on the visibility of this podcast, is how to have recurring customers too. It helps a lot. So we work with, like, for example, promotion tools. We produce video. We produce also media campaigns to help the podcast to find their audiences. And we are based in Paris.
And you're based in Paris.
Yeah.
In Beam Audio Agency, we're based in Copenhagen, Denmark. We are working with both public service, radio and podcast, and also branded content, commercial partnerships. Last year, we had 70% of our turnover in public service. This year will be, for the first time in our 3-year history, more branded content than public service. Mainly because we got 2 new big customers that I'm going to tell a bit about today. In territory, you're also 100% branded content, right?
Just my unit,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
other people do other stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you work with brands, it's very different from public service, at least. And when you start up the production, you need to be clear on what can they expect from the production, from the podcast. So, and it's very different from company to company, how much they know about podcasts. Sometimes you have, at least for my case, we have to explain them what a podcast is in the beginning, and then we go on from there. And then we need to set down the expectations with the customers. In our case, the number one trick into turning it to a successful partnership is to be very clear on the KPIs. What is it all about? What can they expect from this partnership? Many times you would turn to, we're going to get 1 million listeners. But we all know we're not going to get 1 million listeners. We're going to try to get as many listeners as possible. So the KPIs we're working with, almost always with branded content, is not to get as many listeners as possible, but to get the right listeners. So to be clear with the customer, who do they want to reach, and then we're going to try to do that. How do you work with them?
Well, like you said, the most important thing is managing expectations. So usually we get big brands, and then they say, well, we're used to having an ad in the paper or somewhere online, and then on Monday morning we get a rundown of all the clicks and impressions and the leads we generated from that. And then I have to disappoint them and say, well, if you have a branded podcast, you're in it for the long haul. So Matt Lieber, who founded Gimlet Media, which was then bought by Spotify, said it's a marathon, not a sprint. You'll have to wait for the clicks, you'll have to wait for the subscriptions, but then you have very, very loyal listeners. So the great thing about podcast listeners are, once they're hooked, they usually stay. And then for us, actually one of the most important KPI is time spent with brand. So if I get someone listening to my podcast for an hour, and the brand is somewhere subconsciously making a good impression on them, the values associated with that brand are making a good impression, then I have won a lot more than I have with a TV ad or something else.
And in CALLIOPÉ?
For us, it's the same than you guys. But also, we acquire our client, they come to us. So it's different. We don't have to explain them what is a podcast. So they already know. But we have to understand why they want to do a podcast. Because sometimes they just heard about podcasts and they want to do it. And for us, it's very important to understand why you want to do a podcast, what is the ambition on this podcast. And also, how long the relationship will last, because for us it's completely different to have like a campaign podcast for 6 months or to have a marathon and a very long podcast. So this kind of question we ask at the beginning, and I forgot the second one, but it was very important. No, I won't find it. But the idea for us is to understand the target at the beginning, and sometimes they don't know very well their target, to produce the content the audience wants, and I find it is totally different than an advertising. There is a lot of brands, they think a podcast is a long advertising. So it's very hard, but it's very important to explain to them that the brand will be somewhere, as you said, but not in the content. It's not possible. I work, for example, for insurance, who's gonna listen to insurance podcast. It's not possible to do it by yourself, even if you're forced. So the idea is to understand the brand, understand the audience, and to find a trick on the format, on the creative part, to find listeners at the end.
Yeah. Well, now we're going to delve into 6 examples of various podcasts, 2 from each, that we at least consider being successes in different ways. They all got extended to a season 2, which is why we brought them in. To begin with, we have Dior Talks from France.
From France, of course. So we started to work with Dior in 2019, and it's the section called Haute Couture. So Haute Couture, is like the fashion area, which is very easy for us because we don't sell dress with podcasts. So they understood that the brand will be here, but not the product. And also the artistic director is Maria Grazia Curie, which is very invested in like feminism. So she collaborates with a lot of female photographer, designer, artists. So the idea of this first podcast is to have an interview between an external journalist and the artist who collaborated with the brand. We started, the launch was in 2020, 2 weeks after we were locked out in Paris. So we have to change everything in 2 weeks and to start to record remotely. And since this moment, we continue to record remotely because they understood it's very easy for everybody. We have like artists in Kenya, journalists in London, some other in the US, in Los Angeles. So we finally could record everywhere. So we made 1 episode per week during 9 months. And it was a very successful podcast because the brand understands that it lasts. It takes time to get listeners. Even if it's Dior, we needed time to find listeners, to bring the audience from social media to Spotify, to Apple Podcasts. It takes time, so it's important to have this time. And what is very interesting too with Dior is that the brand and the services, the communication services, need time also to understand the format. So, for example, we started with interviews. We did tons of interviews. And right now, 2 years ago, we changed for a narrative format. We don't change, we add another channel, which is a narrative format. So we have an abecedary of the code of the brand. For example, we have S for stars, and we explain why stars are very important for Christian Dior and for the house. So it's completely different, but it helps us to have a French version and an English version. Because with an interview, it's very hard to have like voiceover all the time for 30 minutes. So with a narrative format, it's also very interesting to have like a French format, a Japanese format, because we just have to change the voiceover.
So along the beginning of the show, when you started it, how was your communication with the customer? Say 2 episodes are out, there's not 10 million downloads yet. They start to worry, or how is the communication on early stage?
We have a change with Dior because it's different from other clients. They don't care.
Okay.
Now, to be honest,
I'm dreaming of that.
Yeah, it's a luxury thing, but they don't care about the audience they have, because it was at the beginning, it was for 7 episodes. When we signed the first contract, it was for 7 episodes. I did already more than 100 right now. So it was like a pilot at the beginning, and they wanted to play with the format. They wanted to have time to understand it, so they didn't care about the audiences at the beginning. So right now we put a lot of PR effort. We work with different artists who bring the audience. So it depends on each episode, but they really don't care. It's not a focused client on KPI and audiences. It may change right now.
It may change,
yeah.
But 100 episodes for Dior.
More than 100 episodes, 150, I guess, more or less.
Sounds amazing.
And we also did Dior Tales, which is like tales for kids. So we really play with the brand and different audiences to reach the parents, to reach also the kids, and to reach like the youngest population and the oldest.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you, Nawal. Now we're going to move over to territory and unterwegs mit Deutsche Bahn.
So for those of you who don't speak German, this means like on the road or traveling with. So this is a podcast which we don't produce remotely. We actually produce it on the train. And we're not using it to sell tickets, but we're using it to basically sell this romantic feeling of sitting on a train, you see the landscape go past, and you have a great conversation with someone you didn't know before. And that works out really well to coin a positive image of Deutsche Bahn, which is fighting delays and construction, and there's always a lot of annoyance going on with it. And the great thing we do on this podcast is, so our host Sebastian meets a celebrity every week, and actually every other week. At the moment, he's traveling with Philipp Lahm, the football player. So we accompany him on a trip that he would normally do. So if someone has business going from Munich to Berlin, we go on the train with them. So the guest chooses the route, and then they can also tell us something that they enjoy on route. So we've had people pointing out like landmarks, bridges they usually take pictures of to send to their friends, and other things they associated with it. And this was initially conceived to reach a target group that was not part of the marketing mix. So Deutsche Bahn told us that they had trouble reaching young women between the ages of 20 and 30. They didn't respond well to the other advertising, and they said, well, maybe this target group is actually interested in podcasts, and it turns out they are. So we've been reaching that group for them, and this is also, if you live in Germany, this is a product that accompanies a magazine that used to be on the trains. Unfortunately, that was stopped after the pandemic. And it's also a tie-in with a website. And that's, I guess, one of my recommendations. If you have a customer who trusts you, what we try to do at Territory is then to sell them more services. So we're doing your website, we'll do video for you, we'll do audio for you, we'll do print, don't go elsewhere. So, and that's much easier. We also do pitches, of course, but it's much easier to have a trusting relationship with a customer and then say, well, we could also do this for you. So that's a little bit.
And it's running on season number?
We're on the 3rd season, and we've recorded about 85 episodes.
85 trips with the train to Germany.
85 trips, yes.
Sounds great. Thank you, Anna. The first of my examples is noget for pengene. Translated is probably something like bang for the buck, value for money, something like that. It's about personal finance, private banking. We did this in a partnership with the Danish commercial radio station JFM in the lower left corner. Thank you, Søren. They had this bank, South Bank, Sydbank. It's the 3rd largest bank in Denmark, and they had a problem that they wanted us to solve. When they have young customers in the bank, when the customers or young people in general have questions about personal finance, private banking, so on, the first they ask is their parents. Secondly, their friends, family, boyfriends, girlfriends. And thirdly, Google. The very last they would ever ask any question about any bank-related thing is the bank, who they pay to answer those kind of questions. So they wanted us to solve that problem, or at least do something for them in that way. The target audience with South Bank, Sydbank, is young women, mainly between 18 to 30, 35. Because they are the ones asking the least questions to their bank, in Denmark at least. So we did a cast of these 2 women. The one is Sepur, originally trained a bank advisor. The other one is Anne Lehmann, who is one of the top experts in Denmark in every financial question you could possibly think of. She is in the banking part of Denmark, a megastar. And they're also friends personally, and they're very, very funny. So we tried to figure out how can we reach a young audience, mainly consisting of young women. And what we did was we took Sepur. She's very big on both TikTok and Instagram. She has roughly 30,000 followers on TikTok, 10,000 on Instagram, which is at this moment increasing by approximately 500 a week. I don't know if it's because of the podcast or it's because she's really funny, maybe both. And then we tried to put that energy they have together into the podcast where they talk about personal finance and nothing else. There are no cheating tricks in it. It's all about finance. The way we did the episodes was our main way of working with this. We tried to figure out what do they want to know about. We took episodes directly out of TikTok. There was a thing I just learned called girl math. I had no idea what that was, but I just found out that I am into girl math myself. It makes so good sense. Understand your paycheck. How do you do that? How do you start up a saving account? What to do when buying your first car? All of these things that you would consider while being young and starting to earning your own money. We promote it everywhere, mainly on Sipur's social media accounts, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. Everywhere we do outdoor campaigns. Every Sydbank office in the country, there are about 60 of those. They do outdoor campaigning. We do live shows, which is the both funniest thing and also a place where you could get some more money out of your good customer. Do live shows whenever you have an audience above, I would say, 2,000 listeners per episode. They will show up, even if it's just 50 people showing up. At least half of them will turn into, will sign up for the podcast. We do that for almost every branded content podcast we do. But by building up on their energy and promoting it in that way, we are running on episode 30 now. We reached an audience which is consisting of 75% women and 75% of all listeners are under the age of 35. And Sydbank is insanely happy about this because now some of the listeners started asking them questions in the DM on Instagram. So their main contact to new young customers is their Instagram DM, which is odd to think of, but they consider it a huge success. Besides that, we promoted on the commercial radio station JFM. They have a weekly potential reach above 2 million people. So, of course, that helps a bit as well. We'll run through to Let's Go Challenge.
Yep. This podcast is for Fitness Park, which is a French fitness chain. So the idea was for Fitness Park to be the number one on Apple Podcast on fitness podcast. So we started with 2 formats. The first format is the Let's Go Challenge. So we cast a host, which is a coach, a fitness coach, and he received athletes on his mic. The trick on the format is that we insert like some challenge or real challenge. So we have those athletes, for example, Saladin Parnas is a MMA athlete, MMA we say, yeah. MMA. So inside the interview and during the interview, the coach, the host, stop the interview. There is a dong, and Saladin has to do push-up, burpees, or whatever in the fitness in the gym. And so we just keep some extract on this because it's not very interesting for audio sometimes. So we just take the ambience and the context of this kind of challenge because they laugh. Sometimes it's very hard. Sometimes the previous athlete did better, so he wants to be better, etc. So we have something very funny, but at the end is a very inspirational episode in very, very inspirational format. And in the same channel, we have another format, which is debates. So the idea is to use the community of Fitness Park, which is huge and very engaged. So we wanted to use this community because on TikTok and Instagram, when they are on the gym, they always take pictures, videos to show them and show how they improve at fitness at gym. So we use this community. So we launched a casting on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok to say, hello, we have this podcast. We want to hear you about different themes. For example, sports and drugs. We want something very captivating. And for example, about sports and drugs, the idea is to have received on the studio 2 different people from the community to let them explain their vision and their personal vision, for example, about drugs and how they use it or not at the gym, how it's important or not. And we have the same host to have like something very repetitive for the listeners. And in the same time, each month we have a different format. So you have the same host, but at the same time you can be surprised because one time you have an athlete, very inspirational. Another time you have a debate on something very interesting about fitness. So it's moving a lot. We will start the second season this year, and we use a lot the media. Media campaign to find listener at the beginning, and it's still the case. So, for example, we use a lot the host rate. So the idea is to find very huge sport podcasts in France and to work with those podcasters and to say, hello, we have this podcast, can you promote it? So we have pre-roll, mid-roll, and post-roll during 1 month on those kind of podcasts. So we pick podcast by podcast. Sometimes they are huge podcasts, sometimes they are less, but very engaged podcasts. And it helps us to bring the audience from a podcast to another. And what is very interesting is we are talking to podcast listeners, which is easier to find at the beginning to find an audience, because you don't have to explain them, hello, what is a podcast? There is just an audio, it's on Spotify. So for some people, it's hard to understand and to get it. So we started with listeners and we bring them from a podcast to another. And also we use like traditional media, like display, sponsoring on Facebook, on Instagram, and also we use the cross promotion. So we insert, for example, for big media, we insert an episode on the RSS
RSS feed.
Thank you. So we insert an episode directly on the RSS feed of another episode, and it helps us to have to work our discoverability. And also we use headliner, which is she's here if you need it. So we use headliner, which allows us to have a bigger impression. We're talking about KPI. So sometimes we need to have listeners, but we are talking with brand. So sometimes impression are very important for brand because it's visibility for them. So we use this solution to have a huge number of impression and to find the audience on different medias.
And how did you get this customer? To begin with, just briefly.
When I started the company, I knew someone on the company, so I went there and said, hey, I'm doing podcast right now. Do you want to explore this? He explained to me the marketing director was very cool, but he wasn't ready. He called me he hired a content manager 3 years after, and the content manager called me. She said me you had my director maybe 3 years ago talking about something about podcast, but we are ready. I have a brief. We work on it. It's very precise. Was very accurate, and we do a call for bid. So do you want to be on it? And we were on it, and we won, and it's our client for 2 years right now.
Wonderful. And territory one-to-one? One-on-one, sorry.
So this is a branded podcast that my company produces, which started out as a corporate podcast. And these are two terms that many people use synonymously. But let me just explain to you the difference. So a corporate podcast is put out by a company and they talk about themselves. And a branded podcast is something that is sponsored by a brand. But the company itself shouldn't play a big role. So we started this during the pandemic when everyone started working remotely. So you actually lost track of who works for the company. And if you have a business, you know that if you can't do it yourself, you have to pay people to do it. And then someone said, but don't we have someone who can do this? Don't we have someone who makes podcasts? So the idea occurred that my colleague Till Ulrich would interview experts for something in our company to show to the others, oh, we have someone who does branded podcasts. So now I get calls, for example, from someone in Munich, in Gütersloh. Oh, I heard, you're doing branded podcasts for us. I have a pitch. I need to do this treatment. Can you help me? So actually this Thursday, I'm recording the first episode for a new client whom we got through this project. And then after one season, we decided to turn it into a branded podcast and invite exterior experts so we can show to the world, so to speak, all the things that we can do. And so it's worked really well for us as both a recruiting tool. So we've actually had people apply for jobs who listen to the podcast. And that's a big recommendation I have. If, most people have a website which is slightly outdated with maybe an outdated show reel or something, it's really great if you can listen to someone talk about working in a workplace for half an hour, and then you have now 30 episodes of this. It gives you a much better impression of this company, and maybe you can then decide if you actually want to work there and the opportunities there. So it works both to the interior and the exterior, so for recruiting staff, but also for recruiting new projects. So we've had both employees and new projects come in through this podcast to the company.
Thank you, Anna. Time is running, so we'll skip the next one and instead go to the most important thing. How do we acquire customers? How do we make money? I think that's the most important question to ask yourself when running a podcast business, no matter where it is. How to get new business. Of course, getting a new season is one of the best ways to doing it. Above all, when I work with new clients, I use an average of 10 to 20 full working days in the selling process in the early stage. When we do a new season of an existing show, I use sometimes only 1.5 days. So obviously, it makes insanely good sense to focus on doing the next episode or do more shows. Our partnership with the Sydbank, the bank, now is extended with 2 other shows starting within the next couple of months. Now the important part. How do you in CALLIOPÉ get new customers? What is the best trick?
I think it's different because it's Paris, so I don't know if it's France. Sorry, Paris is not France. So in France, we don't have a lot of very dedicated branded podcast agencies. We have studios which are producing like originals, and at the same time they work for brands. But since the beginning, it's very clear for brand that we are a branded podcast agency. We talk the same language than them. We show them that we understand marketing is just not to produce something, but to reach customer and for them to earn money too. So I use since the beginning the SEO. Nothing you won't learn something very special, but it works very well. I never call a prospect to sell a podcast since 5 years. So I use a lot the content. I use a lot the SEO. If you write a podcast agency in France, you will find us everywhere. We use a lot the SEA, and I think for me the most important thing is like the website, because it's the first interaction with the prospect and the brand, and so our website is clearly welcome. We will work for you. We will do everything about podcasts with you and the references we have. So for us, it's more like inbound marketing we do, and also recommendation. My clients are happy. So when they are happy, I ask them to introduce me to another marketing director because they know each other. So just one-to-one, and I don't have to work and to call every day. So because I don't have the time and the team for that. So I use since now the inbound marketing to do that.
Yeah.
Is that clear?
Since you told me that a month ago when we spoke about this session, the first thing I did when we hung up was to order a new homepage.
It's so, like selling page, and it's
so
the beginning.
I'm so tired of calling everybody. So in the territory, how do you get new customers?
Well, I think I said some of the things already. So when we pitch for a new client, we make sure that we offer all the services. So we make sure that we say we can do a branded podcast, and we show our examples and get them interested, because a lot of people don't even think that that's something that they should have in their marketing mix. And so we tell them that they should have it. Because actually, you can reach people you never reach with other forms of advertising because they're also consuming it at a different time or simultaneously while doing other things. So it's really useful to point that out to people because it's kind of obvious to us, but it's not obvious to some of the people in charge. And then, we're using it with existing clients, trying to use the basis of trust to win more separate contracts, and especially in bigger enterprises, you actually have different departments. So the Deutsche Bahn podcast is part of the marketing department. That's where the budget comes from. But they also have the official corporate accounts. So they asked us to do a special 3-episode special every year with one of their CFOs and CEOs to talk about things, challenges that they're facing within the company. And when the pandemic hit, we did a sort of 7-episode special about how to travel safely during the pandemic, and we had interviews with like a hygiene expert. So using your existing connections to actually reach other people within companies is a really useful way to go, because then you usually get a good recommendation, but they all sit on different budgets. So there's more money within the same company.
And it's a wonderful, wonderful way to do it. In Beam, we're working on network. That is the #1 way of getting new customers. Secondly, we attend pitch rounds whenever a huge brand is telling 2 or 3 companies to bid in on a podcast. We join them, and then I do cold calling, and I absolutely hate it, but it works. 20% of our productions are coming from cold calling. And the best trick, if you're into that game as well, is all these recruitment websites. I see that there's one of my competitors in Denmark. Please hold your ears, because this is one of my best tricks in doing that. Is on these. It's always a matter of what problem can I solve for this company, and then you have to know what their problems are. You can see that from outside that McDonald's don't seem to have that many problems, making tons of billions every year. But whenever a company is seeking new employees, they will tell on recruitment websites, we need a person to help us doing this, that, 1, 3, 4. And in those job descriptions, they will tell what their problems are. So I read them, and then I call them. I see that you're seeking a new employee, but actually I'm not going to apply it, but I'm going to solve the problem for you instead. And then 50% of them hates me and just hang up. And the other half turns into meetings. So it's a really good way to find new customers. And even when you look at, sometimes you search the top 150 companies in Denmark, then there's so many other companies making tons of money who all have the same problem, recruitment. So you can help them with that, for example. Mm-hmm. So get in there and see what are their problems. It's a bit of a cheating code, but it works. But you have to call them. You have to be into that. So that is about it. Any questions? Yeah.
One check. My name is George. I'm from Austria. I run a production company as well. And we do branded podcasts as well. And I'm interested, you, Mats, went to this with the bank one, but I'll be interested, how do you choose your hosts and how do you find them?
Yeah, and that's a very good question, and the answer is different from every product to the other. In this case, they suggested in the very first meeting that, and we have our own hosts, and so I was preparing how to convince them in not to having their own host, because it probably wouldn't work. 9 out of 10 times, the own host is a male CEO asking, maybe it could be me. And often the answer is no, it couldn't.
Reading a script that's been approved by marketing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And legal.
Could this be all about me? But in this case, we found out they had 2 people working with banking, knowing everything they should know, and who also has this special chemistry that you cannot train. They're actually really good friends privately, and they work out together. But if we go the other way around, we do casting rounds and test and see what works.
And to complete Joe's question, what is the part of the budget you put on the host fees and the production fees? Because sometimes for me, like it's a part of the media budget. So I discuss with my client, and I'll say, okay, we have this media budget, and I will take some budget to put it on the host to have an influencer, someone more famous. So how you do this repartition?
It's very different. I think the one with the highest amount of money to the host was like 80% of the entire budget, and we have others where it's 5% of the budget. But it depends on how much of them they got to put into it. Sometimes you can get a famous host and put in the contract that they have to share everything on Instagram, on everywhere. Then of course it gets expensive, sometimes insanely expensive. And sometimes you can do a show where they're just hosts and there's nothing else than that, then a lower price.
But actually, the contract doesn't help. We've changed hosts every season. So we had both male and female hosts. And the current one is really obsessed with the trains. He loves trains. So he will post not just the current episode, but whenever he does a train journey, he's like, look at me, look at me. And that's the best, because that's authentic. He actually loves it. And then he's traveling with his dog. And then we get cute dog content on trains. And that's all free, so to speak, and that's what really pulls people in.
Well, also, when working with big brands, they have to be of some size, and in order to get the next season or in order to make the right product for them, most of big brands spend millions on knowing their audience. And when you sit there in talks with them, and you ask them, who do you want to reach? Women between 18 and 29. Then sometimes, especially in the beginning of the way we worked, we just left the room and just tried to figure out what do they want. But they already have this research that they've spent millions and millions year after year on knowing. And then when we got that from them, all of a sudden we knew the audience better than any other audience. So ask them, because they always have that, if they're of some size. Yep.
Last question.
We'll stick around here after the session, if anybody wants to talk.
Another question from Vienna, Milo from OWOW Podcasts. So you started with, to mention, like, there are a lot of clients still whom you have to educate what is a podcast. So could you elaborate on like pilot projects where people, like customers, could elaborate on what is a branded content and how they, like with the low threshold or low hanging fruit, experiment with the medium versus the ideal branded podcast, you know, like a customer journey basically.
So you're asking, how do we answer the question when they ask what is a podcast and why is branded content?
No. At the beginning, you often need like a cheap product that they just try out the
like
medium.
a book.
Yeah, but it's not the ideal branded podcast and not necessarily something you would advise them. But they need it to experiment. Like, how do you lead them from an experimental project to the real thing?
I don't do pilot because I think we need time to produce something very well. So if I do a cheap pilot, it's worse if they don't have an idea what is a podcast. They will have a bad idea what is a podcast. So I try to don't do that. So it's a lot of recommendation. So it's a storytelling. So you have to involve them on the story. To explain them, the creative concept it's important to have some creative concept, very detailed. And after some references and inspiration, like, for example, you want to do an interview, just force them to listen interviews. You want to do a documentary for them to listen to documentary. And it's like a mood board for me. We do a mood board, so we do like a concept, very detailed, with the title of the episodes, the pitch of each episode, to have a big structure, an editorial structure, and at the same time to have a mood board, an audio mood board. And with those things, you can bring them to what could be their podcast. And after you have the methodology to produce it, and with those steps, we can drive them finally to a final project without doing a cheap pilot, which for me is not a good idea.
And also the pilot will just tank. You'll get like 0 subscriptions unless you put a lot of money on the media placements. So I think, 10, I used to say 10 episodes, now would I actually say 20 to actually build up a following. And I wouldn't just do a cheap version. I would just try to sell them the real thing.
And just very briefly, the first Beam has existed for 3 years. The first year we said yes to everything. If there's 100 euros, I'll take it and make anything. Now, 3 years later, we don't do that. We don't do pilots. But we do tell them what else we've been doing. Yeah. And then we sell it by that.
And maybe going back to the thing you said about the CEO, the first thing you have to tell them is they can't be perfect, they need to be authentic. So when we record on the train, you have noise, you have the ticket collector coming in, you have announcements, and if the announcement is the train is 78 minutes late, then that's the announcement. And in the beginning they edited it out, and I'm like, no, we're keeping that in, because everyone knows they're late. So, and that actually makes them, no, but then people love that, because they're like, oh God, that's worse than my last trip.
Yeah.
That was going to be my question, was how do you deal with the announcements that are in the background on the train? But you've
we have a separate microphone that collects, that records all the announcements.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a fascinating session. As you said, Nawal, Anna and Maz are going to stick around for a few minutes, but I know it's time for coffee if you need to do that. But please, ladies and gentlemen, give it up to our panel for branded content.
Thank you.
We've got a half-hour break, and then we'll be back to talk about content in cars.